Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our IT Services Benchmark webinar, Modernization and Migration, AO and Cloud in 2014, Insights from TBR's IT Services Vendor Benchmark, highlighting the results from our recent Professional IT Services Benchmark. My name is Allison Crawford, and I will be your host for today's session. Before I pass it over to Patrick, Elitsa, and Jen, there are a few logistics I'd like to cover. First, we're recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit our channel to watch this presentation or any of the others that we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your opinions and thoughts on the materials we're presenting. Please send any questions or comments to the Q&A or chat function. The analysts will address them at the end of the presentation. Or if you'd like to set up a client inquiry for more detailed discussion, please reach out directly to myself or the analyst at the end of the webinar to set up that conversation. Third, we'll send out the slides to everyone registered for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. You can also find these slides as well as other thought leadership pieces, webinar decks, and commentaries on SlideShare at www.slideshare.net/TBR_market_insight, and we'll share all these social media links with you again at the end of the presentation. Now let me introduce Analyst Elitsa Bakalova, Analyst Jen Hamill, and Principal Analyst Patrick Heffernan from the Professional Services team here at TBR. Elitsa has been covering IBM, Capgemini, Atos, and T-Systems for the past 8 years, as well as the global delivery market landscape and management consulting industry. Jen practiced law for several years before joining TBR and is the lead on HCL Technologies, TCS, Wipro, Cognizant, Genpact, and Xerox, as well as covering cloud and consulting along with the rest of the TBR Services team. Patrick is a State Department and Deloitte alumni and our lead professional services research team. With their inputs, the professional services team has guided countless clients to improve margins and understand new global opportunities to expand their research. And with that, let me hand this over to Patrick.
Excellent, Allison. Thank you. And I just want to say right from the beginning, this webinar that we're going to present to you today is based on a benchmark that we issue every quarter. It covers 31 IT services vendors. It's 60-something slides long. And again, we publish it every quarter, so there's an enormous amount of depth, there's an enormous amount of substance in this benchmark. So we're going to try and cover as much of it as we can in this webinar series, and you can go back and listen to some of the previous webinars and previous quarters. And please feel free to reach out to any of the three of us that are going to present today if you want to ask some specific questions. Again, I want to stress here that we're covering 31 vendors. We're covering a quarter's worth of performance metrics and strategic developments and acquisitions and activities. So it's a very broad scope of actions that we're going to cover in a very short amount of time. And so what we're going to do is you're going to hear first from Elitsa, you're going to hear from Jen, you're going to hear from me, and I'll turn it over right away to Elitsa to go through what we're going to do today.
Thank you, Patrick. As Patrick mentioned, we're focusing this webinar on application outsourcing. I hope everyone can hear me well, and I will start from here. Applications outsourcing revenues are slowing for all but the top professional services vendors. Some of the large vendors continue to grow revenues by successfully migrating clients to cloud, orchestrating a completely new landscape for IT services, and generating new earnings opportunities. Revenue growth has spurred investment in new offerings, partnerships, and delivery models in the IT services sector. During our presentation, we'll focus on 3 key topics listed on this slide, and they include, number 1, applications outsourcing performance, and we'll call applications outsourcing by its short name AO for the purposes of this presentation. Number 2 is cloud adoption, and number 3 is industry change. In AO performance, I will start by comparing AO to the overall IT services revenue. Then I'll make a comparison of AO against the rest of the service lines covered in the IT services vendor benchmark, and I'll finish off with 2 examples of AO vendors that grow faster than the average AO growth. Let's move to slide 5. AO revenue growth decelerated from 6.8 average trailing 12-month year-to-year growth in 4Q12 to 4.2% average TTM year-to-year growth in 4Q13. There are 2 main reasons. 1, clients invest in shorter-term tactical projects, and 2, clients migrate legacy applications to cloud. On slide 6, we're showing a graph that represents average trailing 12-month AO revenues and growth for overall IT services revenue for the 31 vendors that we cover in the IT services vendor benchmark. AO growth, which in this slide we present in the blue line, began to decelerate in 1Q12 and continued in its downward trend in 4Q13. There are several main reasons, and they include soft demand for traditional packaged applications, price pressures, especially from India-centric firms that compete for deal renewals in mature markets, services commoditization, demand for shorter-term tactical projects, and the shift to cloud. On slide 7, let's see how AO performs compared to the rest of the service lines. All IT services decelerated in growth in 4Q13 when compared to their growth during 4Q12. The graph on this slide shows average TTM year-to-year revenue growth for the 4 service lines that we cover in the IT services benchmark. The dots on the graph indicate year-to-year growth, and the arrows indicate directional change relative to the year-ago quarter. AO was the second fastest growing service line in 4Q13 after BPO, and was the smallest loser in terms of year-to-year growth when compared to the rest of the outsourcing service lines, so when compared to BPO and ITO. Despite the AO revenue growth deceleration, vendors that succeeded to expand their AO revenues monetize opportunities in application modernization and migration to cloud and mobility-enabled IT environments. They also offer clients industry-specialized application outsourcing offerings. On slide 8, I have 2 examples of vendors, and my vendors are Accenture and TCS, that grow faster than the average AO growth. In the past 5 quarters, both vendors expanded their AO revenues faster when compared to the average TTM AO revenue growth that we show in a blue line. Both vendors chase larger scale opportunities through solutions that cover the application's life cycle, but also support wider transformation, thus increasing value for their clients. Both firms bundle AO with other service offerings such as consulting and SI and ITO, as well as add mobility capabilities. For example, Accenture deployed a mobility platform and provides related AO services as part of its deal with YSPay in China. TCS, on the other hand, provides development and management of mobile applications in addition to AO. Now I'd like to turn it over to Patrick, who will cover cloud computing and the effect it has on the AO service line.
Excellent. And Elitsa managed to go through all that and only said cloud by my count 3 times. So that's pretty good, because you can't talk about IT services right now and not talk about cloud. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cover some of the performance metrics that we're seeing AO relative to cloud, and then I'm going to go from the high level down to 3 examples, Atos, IBM, and Capgemini, and show what's happening and how they're responding to cloud and AO. So this chart, take a moment here to look at this. It shows us cloud-based ADM, applications development and maintenance, consistently eating away at AO revenues, traditional AO revenues. And ADM has had a 30+% revenue growth for the last 3 years, and AO has slipped below 10% for the last 2 years. And so the headline here says it all. I mean, cloud computing overlaps. And so vendors are forced to come up with new business models or change what they're doing in this area. So I'm going to pause for a moment, let everybody take a look at some of the data on this slide and this chart, and remind everyone that this will be available after the webinar is over. You'll be able to take a look at it. And this is actually a good indication of how much data supports the analysis that we're presenting here today. So and one other note, this comes, as you'll see, from the footnote that this comes from our Cloud Professional Services benchmark. So while we're covering IT services today here at TBR, we've got multiple products that cover global delivery, that cover cloud, that cover management consulting. We've pulled a lot of that in today to this webinar for this particular presentation. So let's take a sort of a big overall view here of what's happening in AO as a result of cloud. On the top left, the top and the left, you have the big strategies, the long-term strategies that vendors are using to adjust to the cloud environment. They're bundling AO with other outsourcing services. They're developing vertically aligned applications and vertically specific approaches for AO. I'll get into some examples of that in a moment. And on the bottom and on the right, you can see really what's driving the activity there in the AO space right now. And so as Elitsa mentioned, upgrading and modernizing applications for the cloud, migrating legacy applications to the cloud. This stuff that's happening now in the bottom and the right, it's short term, it's a great burst of revenue, it's not going to last. I'm going to come back to this idea a little bit later, but it's really essential to understand that this is the market right now, and it's going to be like this for the foreseeable future, but when that drops off, it's going to drop off substantially. Okay, so that's the 10,000-foot view. Now we're going to go down to a couple of specifics here in these companies. I want to start at the bottom here and look at IBM. And so sort of very simply, you know, when you think about IBM in the last year, you just have to think about cloud. They've invested over $1 billion in cloud infrastructure. They've invested another $1 billion in cloud platform capabilities. IBM's cloud business now extends across the cloud stack to include applications, and that's both cloud-enabled legacy applications and acquired applications. It includes pretty much everything you can do in the cloud space as a professional services software applications. We've got platform with Bluemix, we've got infrastructure with SoftLayer. IBM has launched industry-specific cloud computing services that enhance the entire end-to-end cloud portfolio for IBM. So when you think about, well, what is IBM's response in AO in their applications outsourcing business to the cloud environment, it's to go whole hog into cloud, and they have the skill to do it. And if you look at Shift now, and we'll look up at to the right, we'll look at Atos. You know, Atos is one of those companies that they've been in the benchmark since its beginning. They've been a growing firm, and for them, it's the vertical expertise that they're bringing to the table. So, and I'll talk about manufacturing as one example that differentiates Atos. They have integrated their manufacturing portfolio so that it goes from consult, design, and build the entire life cycle. And it includes process and solution harmonization for manufacturing IT. It includes industry-specific reference process houses and solution maps. And if you go past consulting and just to the design build phase for manufacturing, Atos has product lifecycle management, global agile manufacturing, which sounds pretty impressive because that includes manufacturing execution systems, manufacturing intelligence, and plant maintenance. And once you get past design build, the services lifecycle ends with application management offerings such as MES, PLM, ERP, engineering applications, and operations management. Now, half of what I just said makes no sense to anybody who's not in the manufacturing space, and that is exactly my point. Atos sees this vertical specialization as a differentiation from the rest of the competition and as a growth strategy, and they're executing on it. And hopefully everything I just said made sense in terms of manufacturing, but I can certainly go back and revisit that if there are specific questions. All right, innovation-led, that's the third approach here. So one approach to dealing with cloud is to go cloud-heavy. Another approach is to go vertical. Another is to go in innovation, and these are not exclusive, of course. I mean, IBM is a good example of a company that's doing all three, but Capgemini, just last year, they announced a new big data and business intelligence solution called Elastic Analytics. And again, we got to pause here for a moment and consider that is a really cool name, Elastic Analytics. So credit to their marketing people for coming up with that. And I'm going to read now a description that Capgemini provides, because it perfectly encapsulates where AO can go with innovation. So Elastic Analytics is an enterprise-ready integrated solution that includes infrastructure management, security support, and maintenance to run analytics solutions on a cloud environment. So that is, in my words, melding innovation to cloud and carving out something new, something that can help you stay in the market and stay relevant. And if you listen to that entire description by Capgemini, what does it end with? It ends with on the cloud environment. So I think it's critical there that what Capgemini is doing in terms of innovation is ensuring that that innovation is tied seamlessly to cloud. So what's the thing in the middle? Strategic partnerships, alliances, networks. That's also critically important. It's probably what ties these three different strategic approaches together. And it's actually a very good transition over to Jen, who's going to talk about a lot of the trends that are happening in this space, including alliances, partnerships, and acquisitions.
Thank you, Patrick. In this next section, we're going to discuss some of the trends in how vendors are adapting to this new era in AO. Patrick went through some of the trends on that global vendors such as IBM and the European firms are using to adapt to this transition. So what I'm going to do is focus on a different group, the India-centric vendors. So on the next slide, let's take a look at how the industry dealt with the transition in the AO market in 2012 and 2013. And then we'll talk about how we see the trend evolving in 2014. So as Elitsa mentioned, AO revenue growth was already decelerating in 2012. This prompted vendors to build capabilities in application modernization and emerging technology solutions through acquisitions mostly. And this acquisition activity continued into 2013, mostly by larger firms such as IBM and Accenture, which have more of the resources to continue to acquire. But acquisitions are expensive, they take a long time to integrate, and they require a long-term commitment to a particular IP or geography. So as technology trends are continuing to evolve more rapidly, and clients are looking for AO vendors to deliver outcomes beyond just cost reduction, alliances have become a key method for up-and-coming firms to fast-track entry into industries and geographies and deliver the holistic AO solutions that their larger competitors are able to deliver internally. In 2014, we'll see a continued shift in AO vendors' role from traditional application support and maintenance to that of systems integrator. First, by optimizing legacy applications to run on cloud, and then delivering managed services to support the entire cloud environment. This is where we will see alliance activity really pick up throughout the year. Vendors are looking to partner to prevent being left behind by larger firms like IBM that have been faster to build integrated cloud stacks. On the next slide, let's look at a group of vendors that bucked the industry trend in AO, as I mentioned before, the India-centric firms. And this graph shows the average AO revenue on a trailing 12-month basis for the 5 major India-centric vendors that we cover in our benchmark: Cognizant, Infosys, HCL Technologies, TCS, and Wipro IT Services. In 2013, while average AO growth continued decelerating for the vendors in our benchmark as a whole, the Indian vendors, on average, saw an AO revenue growth accelerate throughout the year. We attribute this acceleration to the success these vendors have experienced with winning multifaceted outsourcing engagements, particularly in the US and Europe, where clients are seeking immediate cost reductions in applications. Europe in particular has grown more open to outsourcing as economic pressures weigh on IT budgets. But outside of these few marquee deals, Indian vendors have increased signings of smaller, discrete projects focused on application modernization, both in mature markets and in emerging markets such as the Middle East and India. Though cloud models are shrinking AO deal sizes, these firms have developed repeatable processes and IP-based solutions that can be scaled across a greater number of engagements. These firms have been able to keep pricing aggressive, yet maintain and even grow margins with a combination of low-cost resources, automation, and platform-based managed services. One example is HCL Technologies. Their Alt-ASM offering uses IP-based assessment tools and is delivered through their Mascot Managed Services framework. Wipro also offers a platform-based managed services offering, ServiceNext, which combines IP, automation, and analytics to reduce management costs. The challenge for these firms going forward will be maintaining AO revenue growth once the initial modernization and migration work is complete, as Patrick mentioned, particularly as global firms with fully developed cloud stacks, such as IBM, are able to offer turnkey SaaS solutions. Although Indian firms have done well winning business on cost, cost alone will not be enough to retain business and win new accounts as cloud and mobility applications become more mainstream. Which brings us to the next slide. Clients are becoming savvier and demanding more value out of outsourcing engagements, including a full range of technology capabilities and expertise that address the application needs of their specific industry. Where global firms such as IBM are well ahead in cloud and vertical-specific investments and can offer true end-to-end AO services, Indian firms rely on alliances to quickly add technology and industry expertise and access to new clients. We saw 3 alliance profiles emerge throughout 2013 and into 2014, some examples of which are provided in this table. The first profile focuses on application modernization and migration to cloud environments. As I mentioned earlier, the role of the AO vendor is shifting from traditional application maintenance to systems integration and management of the underlying infrastructure, which will eventually erode AO revenues, even for the Indian vendors. Both Cognizant and HCL have entered alliances that fit into this profile. The second type of alliance aims to add support for leading-edge technologies, such as embedded software and machine-to-machine. These alliances enable vendors like TCS and Wipro to target a particular vertical, such as automotive manufacturing or telecom, with niche application development capabilities. The third alliance type involves expanding existing relationships with enterprise application vendors such as SAP and Oracle. All of the Indian firms work with SAP, but each firm tries to put its own stamp on SAP solutions to differentiate, usually by taking a vertical focus. In this case, Infosys works with SAP on a mobile application for retail. Beyond alliances, Indian vendors are also rolling out their own versions of digital transformation solutions that combine consulting, integration, and ongoing managed services. It's still too early to tell who will ultimately succeed among the array of similar offerings in the market between the Indian vendors and their global competitors such as IBM and Capgemini. But we expect that the sales efforts will focus first on existing accounts. So now that we've discussed investments in the technology side of AO, I will turn it back over to Patrick to discuss the impact of cloud on resource management.
Thanks very much, Jen. And the way you just broke down the different types of alliances, I think is really important to understand that when you look at this space and you can create a list of alliances or acquisitions that were made, it's so much more important to understand what the different trends are and how those different alliances and acquisitions stack up within the individual vendors in terms of their strategy, but also in comparison to the other firms. So enormously helpful. All right, this slide, if you look very closely, if you stare at the gray footnote at the bottom, you can see that this chart actually comes from our global delivery benchmark that was issued back in, it was beginning of this month, I believe. It's separate from IT services, and it focuses on resource management, headcount, revenue, all the details of low-cost offshoring and high-cost near or onshoring IT services. It is smaller in that it only covers 14 vendors, but it's similar to IT service, to this benchmark we're presenting today. It has metrics and analysis across service lines and geographies, and it includes profiles. But we took this particular chart out of this because if the chart back on slide 10 didn't scare you by the way that ADM is eating into applications outsourcing, you can see here the impact of cloud on headcount. And so what's happening? Why is this happening? Why is so much headcount deteriorating this quickly? Cloud is very simply forcing companies to adjust, and AO is critical to that rebalance. Companies need to keep their best talent. They need to trim the rest of the talent, and they need to invest in IP. I mentioned this earlier, talking about Atos and Capgemini, and they have to keep the profits cooking along while still decelerating the human requirement. And I love that particular phrase, decelerating the human requirement. In other words, hire fewer people and automate more is what that comes down to. And we're seeing this area that's circled in red, we're seeing the impact of that. So like I did with cloud, I'm gonna go to 3 specific vendors here to give some examples. And right there, IBM is back again. It's clear they're reducing their AO headcount. They're focusing on software as a service. They're focusing on industry expertise, and they're focused again on cloud. HP is restructuring, and that restructuring process is an opportunity to strip some of the AO headcount out and align themselves better for growth. And then in contrast, on the bottom we have Cognizant. They're adding resources, particularly with the skills in cloud and mobility. They're ramping up exactly those short-term bursts of activities that I mentioned earlier in terms of migration of legacy applications to the cloud, in terms of modernization of applications to the cloud. So over the longer term, the question then becomes, can Cognizant compete with IBM and with HP if they continue to add headcount? It's a question of whether they're adding the right resources, and then it becomes a matter of time and scale, and whether or not they're going to be able to innovate and keep up with the other companies. So that we're getting a lot into specific companies here. The larger point is this: companies, vendors in this space have to adjust headcount, AO headcount specifically, because of cloud and because of the impact on their business models. So this last slide here, you can read the assertions here. You can agree or disagree. This is clearly our opinion slide here at the end. But I want to sum it up and say this, this is what we're seeing. AO has been a leader in IT services growth, or it has not lagged as much as the others, might be a better way to put it, as Elitsa explained at the very beginning. And that's primarily because AO is the leading or the bleeding edge of cloud adoption. And once that modernization and migration to cloud runs out, the vendors that haven't developed something else or do not have other revenue streams, those vendors are in trouble. And that's a really grim note to end on, but as you saw from the beginning, the growth has not been ramped up in the last few quarters in IT services generally. So before we get to questions, I'll try to turn it back to a happier note. These are the issues that we're looking at going forward. If you're in Canada, you're welcome to reach out to us and tell us what you're seeing right now. We'd appreciate some additional feedback. Security is a tricky issue within IT services, because I think for a lot of vendors it underpins everything. It's foundational. It's very simple risk mitigation at this point, but it's essential. And then industry-specific IP. Back when I was talking about Atos and manufacturing, I think that's an area where we're going to see more, not manufacturing specifically, but industry-specific IP is an area where we're going to see IT services vendors focus more and more. So on the left, you have the list of the vendor reports. Those are the vendors that we cover. It's also the benchmarks that are there, and that we've mentioned a couple of them so far today. And I hope that has given you a lot to chew on, a lot to think about, and I'd be welcome to open the floor up to questions. So Allison, if you want to let us know who's out there with questions.
Great, thanks. We've had a few come through, and if anyone has any questions, please send them through now. The first slide actually is slide specific. So Patrick, if you can put it back to slide 8 for me. The question is, on slide 8, Accenture's growth is going down while TCS's growth is going up. What do you account for this difference?
I'm going to take this question, Allison.
Okay.
Jen covered in detail and provided examples about the India service providers. So I'm just going to add a few highlights on TCS. TCS successfully pairs legacy application development and maintenance services with low-cost leverage. And this allows the firm to compete on outsourcing engagements and, beat competitors in terms of pricing. So when you look at TCS and when you compare Accenture, Accenture does have well-developed global delivery network. It does use low-cost resources for service delivery. But based on the numbers, I believe TCS's low-cost leverage range is in the 80% versus Accenture's in the 60%. That's for total, in total, and for applications outsourcing, they're relatively similar percentages of headcount located offshore for delivery. So that's one factor that allows TCS to win deals against competitors by reducing pricing and, support the higher growth that it has exhibited during the past several quarters if you compare it against Accenture in this case. And I'm sure for the other India-centric firms, it will be the same case where they have faster growth in AO when compared to the multinational companies. Thinking about examples of deals, for example, TCS, I think, won part of the IBM renewal deal with Bharti Airtel in India for application outsourcing services. And one more deal is the government of Odisha in India. It chose TCS instead of HP to deliver application and maintenance services.
I would throw one more thing out there. It's a great question because with this chart or with this particular slide, you can see the contrast. But when we talk at a 10,000-foot level about what's happening in applications outsourcing, or even at a 20,000-foot level about IT services generally, it's easy to forget that each of these companies has their own business model, their own approach to this market, and as a result, the environmental impacts on them, whether it's cloud, whether it's automation, whether it's changes in the resource talent pool in India or elsewhere, it's going to affect them in different ways. And I think Elitsa's answer there was great because it shows that you got to look at each vendor individually.
Okay. We actually had a question that just came through on definition, so I'm going to jump that up just because I think other people might be wondering. The question is, can you shed some light on definition of ADM used by TBR, and more importantly, in the context of how it rolls up to your AO definition?
Sorry, the question's on ADM?
Yeah, I'm cold, sorry. Can you shed some light on the definition of application development used by TBR, and more importantly, in the context of how it rolls up into the AO definition?
Sure. Jen's going to pull up the definition that we use within the benchmark so that we've got it and we can read it word for word. What I want to make sure is clear, though. The different benchmarks include vendors that are covered across multiple benchmarks. So, for example, in the cloud professional services benchmark, you'll have Accenture. You'll also have them in the management consulting benchmark, in the IT services benchmark, and in the global delivery benchmark, and then in the reports that we put out. In every one of those cases, TBR uses the same set of data, the same model, we're starting from the same place. So we're not double counting, we're not isolating a certain set of revenues and calling it something different, or we're not providing metrics that don't match up with each other. What we're doing is we're ensuring that for each vendor across all the different benchmarks, the metrics all line up. I hope that makes sense. And I'll let Jen explain exactly what the definitions are we're using here.
Sure. So just to break down ADM, for the purposes of our benchmark, applications outsourcing includes support and maintenance of enterprise applications, but we carve out some of the development revenue into the systems integration segment because that involves.
Jen, can you, sorry to interrupt, can you get a little closer to the phone? We're having trouble hearing you.
Oh, sorry about that. I was just saying that support and maintenance we categorize under the application outsourcing bucket, but we do carve out some of the development work for our systems integration segment. And this is just work that is more on the custom side that involves, bringing disparate systems together and making sure that the application runs smoothly on the infrastructure.
Right. And so AO is component development, support, and maintenance of enterprise applications, and then ADM is what Jen just said it is. So I hope that answers the question. If there's a follow-up on that, please let me know.
Okay. The next question we had looks like it's a two-part question. You mentioned how Indian vendors apparently Indian vendors are so important. You mentioned how Indian vendors are doing better in Europe. What changed to make European clients more willing to use these vendors, and why did that demand change?
I can take that one, Allison. We see there are two main factors driving the greater demand in Europe for India-centric vendors. First, the economic conditions are improving, but cost remains top of mind, especially for larger enterprises. So clients with existing outsourcing contracts are looking for more price concessions on rebid, which is, has been an avenue for India-centric vendors to catch deals on renewal and take them from legacy vendors such as IBM and HP. And also, there are many companies in Europe that are looking to outsource IT functions for the first time. So Indian vendors are increasingly getting a seat at the table for these deals by pricing competitively. And the second factor that we're seeing has to do with the strict labor regulations in many European countries. So these high labor costs and restrictions around layoffs are driving companies to look to outsourcing rather than hiring to fill IT needs. And so Indian vendors are addressing this need by, both adding their own resources onshore and also by agreeing to take on their clients' IT departments so that the client no longer has the burden of maintaining labor costs and benefits and all of that. So those are the two main factors that we see driving the greater demand.
And I think in response to that, we had another question come through. So what are the European-based vendors doing about this?
That's a really good question. You want to take that?
Yeah, I will take that question. So, by covering the European firms, I hear them more often talk about competing against India-centric firms in Europe for deals. And applications outsourcing and the other outsourcing service lines are an area where European firms see more competitors from the India side. And I want to provide one example, which is Capgemini, that comes to my mind. So what Capgemini did to be more competitive, and it's still in that transition phase because it's launched in 2013 and going on right now, is the firm is adjusting its delivery capabilities to be able to improve prices and beat India-based firms. So what it does is, in addition to having the low-cost resources in India and in nearshore locations, but largely in Asia Pacific, to do the application outsourcing tasks and benefit from labor arbitrage, Capgemini began to industrialize its applications services delivery model. So what it did, it started changing the way it delivers services from client-dedicated resources and in the centers to multi-client factories and shared services. So this helps the firm improve productivity. It adds on to the positive effect of labor arbitrage, and then allows the firm to have more pricing flexibility and effectively compete. Another example in application management is towards the end of 2013, Capgemini launched the so-called Next Generation Application Management, which is a platform, and it focuses on delivering business value to clients. It uses IP. it has industry-specialized capabilities, and provides seamless global delivery. So that's one area that supports the firm's applications delivery. And, one example for that application management next generation is Statoil in Norway. It was a recent deal that the firm won. And the firm says that it had, competition from the India vendors, but it actually won the deal. So it's a significant move for that next generation application management platform.
I want to throw one more thing out there too, because we've just talked about the Indian firms, we talked about the European firms. I know from feedback we've gotten on this, we've received on this benchmark and on other benchmarks, that it can become very easy to lump the different vendors into categories based on where they're based or on how they're structured, whether they're privately held or they're public companies or whatever. What I think is important to understand here is when we put these benchmarks together, we do not do the research just based on the Indian firms, looking at them as a group and then looking at the European firms. We look very much at the vendor individually. So we build up our understanding of what's happening with these vendors on a vendor-by-vendor basis, which then is then constructed or then builds for us a picture of what's happening in the landscape, and we're able to pull out trends. And just like anybody else, we tend to make those comparisons between like firms, but that doesn't mean we're starting with the comparisons and driving down. Instead, we're starting with what we know about these vendors and building up to the larger trends. So I hope that's clear.
Okay, thanks. It doesn't look like we have any additional questions in queue, so with that, I'm going to start wrapping up. So the folks that have asked for follow-ups, we do have those captured, and we will be reaching out to you by the end of the day to get you that information. As I mentioned, I'm going to share all the social media links with you. So I do encourage you to follow Patrick, Elitsa, and Jennifer on Twitter at the handles listed here, as well as the TBR handle, and to join us on our social media pages for SlideShare, YouTube, and LinkedIn. We are sharing a lot of information, kind of our free reports and our special commentaries through LinkedIn particularly. They're kind of breaking there, so do please join us on LinkedIn. As you're leaving the webinar, there's a short survey, 3 questions. How good was the presentation? Did you find value? How good were the presenters? And if there's any open-ended feedback you'd like to share with us in terms of topic areas we should be covering, or items that we didn't go into enough depth, or things that you'd like to see us doing in the future. We are using that feedback quarter to quarter to improve our webinars to bring you more value, so we do look forward to getting your feedback. I'm going to leave the chat function open for another couple of minutes in case there's any last-minute requests for follow-up conversations or questions. And if we don't hear from you now, Patrick had mentioned we are doing a webinar on our global delivery market landscape on the 21st of, is it the 21st, Patrick?
I hope that's right.
Yeah, the 21st of May. So we encourage you all to join there to find out what's happening with the global delivery market in terms of investing in offshore resources and centers. And we'll be doing this webinar again in the next quarter. So if you have any questions between now and then, please do give us a call and join us on social media, and we'll be in touch with you over the next couple of weeks. Thanks, everyone, and have a great afternoon.